Good afternoon, everybody. We'll just give it a few minutes to let everybody in, and then we'll kickstart the session. Just give us a few seconds. Our numbers are getting better, and then we'll then start the session straight away. Okay, perhaps we can start this afternoon. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of Sawia and Savia, I wish to welcome everybody who has attended today's session, where we are looking at opportunities in construction, operations, and maintenance. This is our fifth and final webinar of the six-part series that we call Developing Local Renewable Energy Value Chain Webinar Series. We started this series at the beginning of the year. This series obviously is driven by Sawia and Savia in partnership, and is also supported by our friends and partners, BIPA, RIFSA, IPPO, as well as our other numerous sponsors over the period. And we have also received incredible support throughout this series from all of you present and those that are not present today. Some of you will remember when we started the series, we looked at local content requirement issues in the RIP. And then we started looking throughout the value chain in terms of what are some of the opportunities for localization. We started in development phase, we went to manufacturing stage, we went to transportation and logistics, and here we are today on the construction, operations and maintenance. So today our distinguished speakers will be introducing this topic and breaking down what some of the opportunities are in this industry. And this, we hope, will help you identify and understand what are the possibilities for the businesses, whether you are a startup, growing entity, or even a mature player in this sector. Our aim, obviously, as partners, as representatives of the renewable energy industry, is to constantly collaborate with stakeholders across the renewable energy sector to share knowledge and drive effective change. We believe in developing the South African businesses to build the local competence of global standard, because this is key for our industry to grow. Some of the principles we subscribe to is developing the local resources, addressing the skills gaps, and allowing for effective knowledge sharing. We believe that obviously all these efforts are going to better the industry that we operate in. Just some of the initiatives in particular in the skills development that we have done outside of this webinar series. Recently, Sawia has launched a industry internship program, which will kickstart now in January for the next 12 months. And the intention there is to support up to 40 interns within the wind industry sector. And these interns will gain practical experience, industry knowledge, and will be work ready by the end of the program. And we are very proud of our members who have opened up their offices and workplaces to support the new talent. And we believe also they will be mentoring this talent so that at the end of the day, we have a buzzing new workforce that is supporting the renewable energy industry. Ladies and gentlemen, today our program is very straightforward. We would be looking at what are some of the opportunities, firstly in the construction sector, and Lindsay Tazel will, from EDF Renewables, would be assisting us with that topic. And then we will look at the opportunities and on operation and maintenance, both for wind and solar, and Danielle Harding from ED Platform will be supporting us doing that. And then we'll be doing commissioning, and Lakingidi from Matla Engineering will be our speaker there. And then we will hear from the consultant experience, and Chanda Numalo from Hamilton would support us there. And then from there, we will move to questions and answers. And the Russian governor, CEO from Supplier, will be handling that session for us. And our closing remarks would be made by Widow, who is the chairperson of Supplier. So before I call my first speaker, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to encourage you to participate in this webinar through the use of the chat function for interactions or comments to each other or the speakers. And for questions, I would also ask you to use the Q&A functions where Nivesh will be on standby to capture some of those questions and then direct them to our panelists. In which case, those answers and those questions will then be answered during that session. And then we will then bring the session to our closing remark. So without any further waste of time, I'll call upon the first speaker. The first speaker is Lindsay Tazel, as I've mentioned, from EDF Renewables. Lindsay is a head of product implementation at EDF in South Africa. She's a qualified engineer and experienced project manager. Lindsay has led construction in various wind farms for EDF and has been active in renewable energy in South Africa since 2012. EDF, as we know, has won recently a hybrid energy project, Moilanga, under the risk mitigation. And there are other 3 wind projects under round 5. And in addition, there is also a 100 megawatt Mogalakwena PV facility for Anglo-American in partnership with the Pellegrin. And I think with that, Lindsay, please take us through what are some of the opportunities that we can find in construction phase for both wind and solar. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Lindo. Thanks for the introduction. Okay, first slide, please. Okay, so just to give you guys a flavor for what we're going to cover in this construction side, I'll just start with a little introduction to EDF Renewables, and then we're going to jump straight into the procurement of renewable energy projects and give you a bit of background on what happens there. I'm sure that's been covered in previous workshops, but it's always nice to cover it again. We'll look a little bit at supply chain structure and then opportunities within the supply chain during construction, the typical qualification requirements that tend to come with those opportunities, and then crucially, how do you find out about these opportunities? So EDF Renewables has actually been established in South Africa since 2011 with the acquisition of local wind energy developer Innowind. We now have 50 employees throughout the country. We've got 30 in Cape Town and 20 in Port Egger. And all of our operational projects at the moment are based in the Eastern Cape. So we've got Chaba, which is just north of East London. we've got Glassridge, which is just outside of Motherwell. We've got Vineck, which is next to Makanda. And then the latest one to come online in August was Wesley Ciskei, which is located between the communities of Wesley, Planisa, and Hamburg on the Eastern Cape Coast between Port Alfred and East London. And obviously, as Lindo has said in the introduction, 2021 has been EDF Renewables year in South Africa. We've had great success between the risk mitigation round 5, and then obviously this project for Anglo American and joint venture with Pele Green Energy. So first up, how do we procure renewable energy projects? Well, starting at the top left-hand corner here with the off-taker. Now, when we say an off-taker, it could either be a private entity like a mine, for example, or it could be Eskom, but in this case, it would be the DMRE on behalf of Eskom. That's who runs the renewable energy program. They will release requests for proposals out into the market, and the IPPs will receive those. They will then solicit, they'll decide on what their procurement strategy is going to look like, and they'll go out to the market themselves, soliciting offers according to that procurement strategy, working with service providers from the construction services side of things and the construction industry themselves. On getting all those offers in, we then prepare our business case, we prepare our offers, and we prepare our offer under the RFP that came from the off-taker. Once the off-taker receives the offers from all the interested parties in the IPPs, they'll adjudicate those offers according to various criteria. There's usually qualification criteria as well as assessment criteria. And then they'll appoint their preferred bidder. Once they've appointed the preferred bidder, the IPP will then decide who they're wanting to work with from their supply chain, and there'll be a bit of a sort of negotiation process that takes place between the off-taker and the IPP and their construction service providers and their operation and maintenance service providers, during which time all the construction, the financing, the operations agreements are all concluded, and hopefully everybody decides to sign all the contracts around about the same time to mitigate the IPP's risk. And at that point, once we've achieved what's called financial close and all the agreements are signed and the IPP actually has access to its financing, assuming it's non-recourse project financing, we'll then start implementing the project. And for the construction service providers, that means the paydays start and the cash flow starts to you. Whereas for the IPP, for us, we don't actually start to receive our cash flow until the project has been complete, been certified by the off-taker as being complete and accepted, and then we start to generate revenues through the PPA. Next slide, please. So looking a little bit at these criteria. So if we just take a look at the DMRE Independent Power Producer Program and with the latest bid window, these projects are selected usually on the basis of the lowest tariff, particularly if you're looking at a mine, for example, or a private off-taker. They're really interested in getting the cheapest energy that they possibly can. But more than likely, they're going to have some other elements that they require you to meet, and they might make these as qualification criteria, which is if you don't meet these, you don't pass go, we don't even look at your price. Or they might do a mix of what has been done under REAP. In bid window 5, we saw a mix of 90% weighting towards price and a 10% weighting on the economic development obligations, assuming that the threshold level had, of course, been met on those economic development obligations. So from an IPP's perspective, achieving the lowest levelized cost of energy, this LCOE that you might have heard being banded around, is really critical to our success and to our project success. And what that is it's a measure of the NPV of the total costs over the project lifetime over the NPV of the electrical energy produced over the lifetime. And so it's effectively a whole life cost. And as a service provider during the construction industry, this is something important for you to get your head around, because it doesn't necessarily mean that what we want is the cheapest cost. We want the cheapest lifetime cost. So it considers the associated operations and maintenance costs of what's being built and the impact on energy generation. And a simple example of this would be a less expensive, a more expensive cable with lower losses might be proposed. So we would actually then benefit from that because there's lower losses, which means that we get to make more money, over a cheaper cable, which has higher losses, which means that there's less energy being sold to the off-taker. I hope that makes sense. Next slide, please. Looking a little bit at what the supply chain looks like, there are two models that are popular still in South Africa. There's the EPC model or there's a multi-contract model. The EPC model, often called an EPC turnkey, is where there is one contract between your EPC contractor and your project owner, which in most instances is a special purpose vehicle that's set up to own the project. And this EPC contractor is the one that would then contract the equipment suppliers, installation, commissioning contractors, and the balance of plant or the balance of system on the other side. And even at a level and several tiers lower than that, you'll find other subcontractors and suppliers. So as far as the IPP is concerned, we've got one contract we need to manage with the EPC contractor. It's great where it's a market potentially that we are unfamiliar with, or if we don't have, or we've got limited internal construction and design experience in-house to be able to manage that. So it's a much simpler arrangement. The multi-contract model as it exists, funnily enough, involves more than one contract. So the typical way of looking at it, and it can be split into far more work packages than this, is that you have some sort of equipment supply, installation and commissioning contract directly with the project owner, and then there'll be a balance of plant or balance of system contract directly with the owner, and then subcontractors and suppliers to those contractors. This one has higher risk for the IPP because, of course, there's a fundamental interface there between the equipment suppliers and the balance of plant or system that we have to manage. But it does come at potentially lower cost for us, which, of course, when you're looking at LCOE being king, that's important. Looking at the opportunities as they exist within the supply chain. So I've got two slides here. The first one's looking at a sort of typical wind farm, and this is very high level. And likewise, I've got the next slide looks at a solar farm. Nope, back please. We'll talk about wind first. Thank you. So in terms of localization and the opportunities that exist on the wind side, looking at the sort of main work packages that there are, there's obviously the wind turbines, and what comes with those is the interconnection, balance of plant, and then there's facility testing and commissioning. Under the wind turbines themselves, obviously these turbines, generally speaking, are manufactured abroad. And so the manufacturing is done in countries like China, South America, those kinds of places. There's offshore logistics and shipping associated with getting them here. And then we start to look onshore, and then we start to look at what's really local services that can be provided under this sort of TSIA arrangement. So that's onshore logistics, crane edge and installation. And then the commissioning would typically be done by the OEM's team. So there's three aspects here around manufacturing, the offshore logistics and shipping and the commissioning, that it's a little bit more difficult to localize. That said, what we've seen is the Gestamp and one other that unfortunately went under in Port Elizabeth established a steel tower manufacturing facility in Atlantis. So we can manufacture steel towers locally, of course, and then a lot of wind farms in round four we've seen switching to concrete towers for the localization aspect of those, with what seems to be great success. So those aspects can be, and some aspects of the tower internals can be localized. And I think there's been a previous workshop on that, so I'm not really going to cover that. But what's unique to this and what's critical to this, I would say, is you've got to, for a turbine OEM, they've got to have a forward order book in order to look at being able to localize things. And the momentum that we've had in the renewable energy program up to now hasn't really been conducive to large scale localization on the turbines outside of the towers and the kind of easy wins. So if you're looking at local opportunities and you're looking at how to sort of, supply services into the supply chain, I wouldn't suggest that you go looking there. The local opportunities are everywhere else, as you can see. Everything that's colored in here is an opportunity. So on the interconnection, it's everything to do with switchyard, control room, overhead lines, all that sort of grid connection aspect. And it's worth noting actually that to supply services on that grid connection, Eskom does have some requirements, and I'll maybe cover them a little bit later. But they do have some minimum standards and some qualification criteria of their own. On the balance of plant, we've obviously got the civil and electrical scopes of works, and on the civil, we're talking about turbine foundations, access roads, laydowns, hard standings, temporary site camps, those kinds of things. So if you've got experience in sort of building gravel roads for the municipality, or even for the province, or even for SANRAL, and hopefully not gravel roads for SANRAL, but then you've got transferable skills potentially that could be applied to the civil works here. Likewise, on the electrical, you've got MV reticulation, IPP substation. Here we're talking about MV cables, LV to MV transformers, external switchgear, and then substation, MV switchgear, HV transformers, switchyard control and own-in buildings, those sorts of things. Very much transferable, again, with perhaps municipal projects. Next slide, please. On the solar PV side of things, obviously we have the PV plant, and there's a bit more equipment involved in that. Interconnection, balance of system, facility testing and completion, very, very similar to what we have on the wind farm if we break it down that way. But on the PV plant itself, the equipment is, we've got our modules, we've got our module mounting systems, we've got our inverter stations, and there's also SCADA in there. And what we tend to find is that these are a little bit trickier potentially to localize. So you'll see here I've highlighted the manufacturing, the offshore logistics and shipping, and the commissioning of those is likely to be done offshore. It's likely to be led by an OEM, and it's something where it's been a little bit trickier to localize. Some of the bigger module manufacturers have established module assembly plants for previous projects in the country, and that is an option, but it's not necessarily a sustainable option. And again, it comes down to the sustainability of the forward order book, which is generated by things like the REAP program. The other thing just to note on things like modules, inverters, mounting systems, is that IPPs similar to ourselves have qualification requirements for those themselves. So you can't just come to us and tell us that you've developed this wonderful new module. We have a qualification and quality assurance process that we put all suppliers through who want to supply anything to any of our projects. And that process can take 18 months. So it's quite an involved process that comes through that. Looking for local aspects and local ways you can get into the supply chain on PV, I don't suggest you try and build a solar PV module. But onshore logistics and installation, definitely things that can be localized. Looking at the interconnection, similar to what we discussed on the wind, definitely seller side MV equipment, manufacturing, onshore logistics, the installation, commissioning, all of that can be done locally. And majority of the buyer side HV equipment can also be done locally. When you start to look at 400 kV transformers, however, you do have to start to look internationally. On the balance of system, civil works, solar field preparation, roads, internal, external, gate, fencing, control building, drainage, all these things can be 100% local, as can electrical reticulation and obviously facility testing and completion. Next slide, please. I'm going to take a guess that most of the people who are joining us today are probably more in the professional services, so this might be of interest to you. So there's obviously an awful lot of opportunity for people to provide professional services during the whole lifetime of our projects, in fact, all the way through from the development phase right the way through to operations, maintenance, and the eventual decommissioning. What we look for, engineers, top of the list, because we need engineering design, quality assurance, we need commissioning and GRICO compliance assistance. We look for lawyers because with deals like this, you'd be amazed at the legal fees. Financial advisory, because of course we have to look at developing business plans, otherwise we can't build anything. Preliminary studies, yield assessments, land surveying, geotechnical, architectural design, environmental impact assessment, other environmental specialists that we send aside, like bird specialists, botanists, etc. We need health and safety professionals, we need economic and social impact professionals, lots of different skills. I sort of alluded to earlier that Eskom has particular requirements, and one of the requirements that it's got is that when we are building projects for them under self-build, which is what as IPPs we prefer to do because it gives us control over timeline and cost, they get the final say on the consultants that we use on the self-build portion. And they require their engineers to be professionally registered. Their environmental impact assessment practitioners must be professionally registered. Their land surveyors must be professionally registered. That's the sort of minimum requirements that they have. Their contractors, for example, often have to be from an approved supplier list. And I believe that some of the Eskom, it depends which region you're in. Some regions still maintain an approved contractors list or an approved suppliers list. Some don't. Certainly when it comes for equipment and equipment supply. So when you start to think about SCADA equipment, for example, that maybe has to be procured for Eskom, or you start to think of CTs, VTs, circuit breakers, those sorts of things that we build for them in their substations, they will all have to come off approved supplier lists from Eskom. So we can't just propose anything to them. They have some restrictions on what we can do. Next slide, please. Continuing on professional services, there's more. Engineering advisory, just generally, so your lender's technical advisor, your that kind of role. The factory acceptance testing, freight forwarding, customs clearing agents, they've got quite an important role, even if it's a very short one. Community relations management, which is fundamental to the success of any of our projects. Occupational health, safety, security, and training providers. One of the first things and one of the fundamental things we have to do with our teams on site is make sure everybody is competent. So we look at legal liability training, we look at occupational health and safety acts and construction regulations training, everything through to snake handling and awareness is necessary. So these are, I'll just give you another sort of flavor for the sorts and the breadth, I would say, of professional services that we actually look for on site. Next slide. Health and safety, it really is fundamental. That's why it gets a slide of its own. There's various different registrations, professional registrations with SACP-CMP, and we look for people who are professionally registered or organizations that can provide us with people that are professionally registered with SACP-CMP. As the IPP, typically we would appoint the construction health and safety agent, and we may also appoint a construction health and safety manager, depending on what the structure of the project is. So on an EPC, we may just appoint the construction health and safety agent. On a multi-contract, we will likely have both the agent, as that's a legal requirement, and a manager to oversee what's going on and manage the coordination of the contract for us. Further down the tree, of course, if we have an EPC contract, that EPC contractor will have to have a certified construction health and safety manager and probably an officer on site as well. And then further down the tree from that, even still, the civil contractor on site will have a construction health and safety officer. 9 times out of 10, those come from within their staff complement, but certainly at the EPC level and at the IPP level, we look for support from service providers, external service providers for that. Next slide, please. Into the nitty-gritty of construction. So looking a little bit at equipment and plant hire. Generally what happens on a more broader sense, I guess, is that where we would contract as an IPP, we would contract with construction companies that have a CIDB grading of probably 8 or 9. We definitely wouldn't go beneath 8. So that tends to be out of the reach of most kind of SMEs and developing contracting companies. So the opportunities to get into the renewable industry and work on these projects doesn't really exist with, or I wouldn't say it's as prevalent with the IPPs themselves or with those kind of CIDB 8 or 9, actually no, it is with those CIDB 8 or 9 contractors rather, it's not with the IPPs. The opportunities is to find out who those contractors are that have been awarded the balance of plant contract or the civil contract or the grid connection contract, and see what it is that you can provide within that supply chain. So that might be construction plants, so it might be the higher things like TLBs, excavators, dump trucks, etc. It might be other things we've got there, like providing temporary cabins, portable toilets, that kind of thing. Typical work packages that these contractors might give out would be things like perimeter fencing, drainage, installation of drainage ditches, construction of substation control and O&M buildings might be the sort of thing that's also let as an actual work package itself. So there are opportunities to get in there with smaller work packages or provision of equipment or plant hire, that sort of thing. Next slide. Services during construction. As you can see from the list that we've got here, it's pretty wide. It's everything from potable and raw water supply through to internet services, through to the transportation of plant and materials to site, plant repair and servicing. That's a pretty fundamental one. And then obviously quality testing. So we're looking at on-site lab testing, chop floor testing, plate load tests, concrete cube tests, all those sorts of things that are necessary for the quality assurance. On quality assurance, it's just worth noting that any laboratories or anything that we would see used on the project would have to have their ISO 9001 and all their SANAS accreditations in place, so that we were comfortable that they were, testing to the required standards. Next slide, please. Construction opportunities supply. Here we're talking about supply of PPE, signboards, printing. And the big one here actually is probably around actual building materials. So bricks, roof trusses, cables, connectors, conduits, rebar, earthing cables. But again, what we have to note here is that all materials that are supplied to the project have to comply with the relevant SANS, SAB, or international standards such as IEC, because that is absolutely fundamental for us for ensuring the longevity and the performance of the project. And that's definitely worth noting. Next slide, please. So qualification requirements. We mentioned a few slides ago that, you know, when we put in these tenders, normally there's a sort of qualification requirement aspect of things. And if you don't pass these things, you don't actually have your price looked at. So what do you need? You know, you found your opportunity, you want to bid for it. What do you now need to do? So these qualification requirements will either be something that will come maybe before the tender as part of a request for information, or as part of the tender simply as you must meet these requirements before we'll open your pricing package. And the things that are looked for is obviously relevant experience. That's fundamental. And relevant can often mean transferable. So we look at transferable skills, and I made the analogy a little bit earlier about a gravel road construction. And that's really it. It doesn't matter necessarily if you haven't done a wind farm or a solar farm before. If you've done similar types of work to a similar value to the contract that's being let, then that would be transferable skills and could be considered relevant experience. The next thing that's looked for is professional qualifications. Again, we want to see professionally registered engineers, professionally registered architects, environmental impact assessment practitioners, health and safety practitioners. We want to see professional registrations. And I mean here, not just candidate registrations, and you're a candidate and you're registered and you're doing your own thing and building your business, because candidates have to be supervised. We want to see that professional registration. And again, professional indemnity insurances. If something goes wrong, we need to have some recourse somewhere. So we want you to make sure that you have professional indemnity insurances. If you're a professional or if you're a contractor, obviously you have to have your contractors all listed insurances. Minimum compliance we'll get onto in a second, but there will be some minimum compliance requirements that are relevant to the particular tender opportunity and some that are just general standard things. And then fundamentally, contactable references. We want to know who you are, what your experience is, and we want to know what other people's experience has been of working with you and having you working on their projects. So always make sure that you provide contactable references. Next slide, please. Minimum compliance. What do we mean? We basically mean the minimum legal requirements that are required to do business. So here we're talking about your company registration certificate with CPIC. We're talking about your SARS, valid SARS tax clearance certificate, your valid BE certificate or your EME affidavit if that's relevant, and a letter of good standing under COIDA. If you don't have those 4 documents in place, we can't do business. Basically, I go or no go. And generally speaking, there may also be other additional documentation that's required as a minimum, depending on what the tender opportunity is. So for example, we may request to see your ISO 9001, 14001, or 45001 certificates. We might request to see all of them. So there will be other things that we will want to see as part of that. Supplier compliance checks. Just also a word on compliance. We, generally speaking, we're very interested in who it is that we're doing business with, and we will do some vetting on who it is that we do business with. So we will subject compliance checks on directors' criminal convictions, looking for any allegations or proven convictions for corrupt acts, and looking at political exposure. And these are particularly important because, you know, these aspects present a real business risk to us as IPPs. And our funding requirements are very strict in relation to particularly corruption. And it's not just the South African corruption legislation that applies to a lot of us. A lot of us are subject to European, United Kingdom, US anti-corruption laws, which actually traverse the entire world because of the stock markets that our various parent companies may be floated on. So this is something that a number of IPPs certainly take extremely seriously, and you will be subjected to these checks. Last part, how do you find out about these opportunities? My big piece of advice, get on LinkedIn and try and connect with people in the procurement department of the IPPs and the construction contractors. Once you've figured out where you fit in the supply chain, what services is that you can provide, figure out, am I providing these services to the IPP? Am I providing them further down in the supply chain? And then figure out what that supply chain looks like. You know, we all read engineering news, and if you don't, you should, to find out who's doing what within the industry, which contractors are working. Try and make contact with them, have a look at their websites, and, you know, ask for meetings. The worst that someone can turn around and say is no. Register with associations, obviously, like SAWIA and SAPWIA. That's how you network. Come to our events, come to Windaba to meet the relevant stakeholders and use the business-to-business networking that's offered at those events to try and get your foot in the door and start to build those relationships. Another way to do it is obviously to look further in that supply chain and see if you can't build relationships to a supplier who's already working in the supply chain. So someone who perhaps has already been a very successful electrical engineering consultant, but might need some support, perhaps with commissioning support. And you say, okay, cool. You build a relationship with them and you bring them on and they bring you on. That's a great one. Well, I hope this has been useful. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Lindsay. That was very useful to me, and I'm hopeful as well that it was to everybody else. I think you've done justice in unpacking the entire value chain and opportunities that lie in the construction stage. So I think we would like to further pick your brain. I think in the Q&A, I've started seeing some questions coming through at that. So, but we will let that Nivesh to deal with that. I think for myself, thank you very much, Lindsay. And we can then move to the next agenda item on our webinar today. We now are going to be looking at the opportunities in operation and maintenance phase, wind and solar. And to do justice in that will be Danielle Harding from ED Platform. Danielle has several years experience in consulting in economic development components in the South African RIB. She has advised successful bids and have provided reporting and advisory services to IPPs in constructions and operations. She has been responsible for ensuring efficient management and administration of SED and enterprise development obligations of selected IPPs. And she has provided project management, stakeholder engagement, research and conceptualization, implementation and monitoring SED and ED projects that respond to identify needs and opportunities in communities. And lastly, Daniel has a master's in global environmental policy. And with that, Danielle, I hand this over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lindo, and thanks to our hosts for inviting ED Platform to share a little bit of insights. As mentioned, ED Platform is involved in consulting to the IPPs. We started on the back of this IPP policy back in 2011. So we've really cut our teeth on how this policy has progressed, how the requirements have progressed as well. Will help with everything from tender submission through compliance monitoring and all the way through, as Lindo mentioned, to community engagements and community development. So I think our insight is not necessarily as technical as Lindsay. So thank you very much for that, Lindsay. I think you brought a lot that I might not have been able to. But certainly we sort of positioned on both sides of the fence, so to speak, where the IPPs are our clients, but suppliers and the community as well tend to be beneficiaries of the work that we do. So we're in quite a unique position, sort of mediators between those two worlds. So anyway, speaking a bit about the opportunities in the O&M phase. So I've broken this down into 4 very generic, very high level sort of buckets, so to speak, being technical, services, community development, and then also supplier development. So what I've tried to do is sort of flesh out and visualize the actual supply chain and all the services and goods that will be required in each of those very high level buckets. We can jump in. Next slide, please. So on the technical side of things, speaking about wind, for example, a lot of the skills and the services that are required in the technical O&M, technical bucket for O&M really comes down to monitoring. It's monitoring, it's tweaking, it's sort of making sure that the power that you're generating is of a standard quality and it's consistent and it's efficient and everything's working as it should. So speaking about wind, any service or skill that you can bring to the table will only be enhanced if you do that in conjunction with working at heights. Thinking about the blades that are turning, thinking about the turbine that's turning within the nacelle itself. You're talking about lubrication, checking that vibration and temperature, for example, is all within a standard range. So working at heights, I think, is a very important skill. As these components are all moving and shifting, so somebody sort of specialized, I suppose, in assessing the quality of the foundation, making sure that there's no cracks and no shifting there. That could be quite an important thing to monitor when you have to start talking about shaft alignment. So talking about PV, perhaps a little bit obvious, but panel cleaning. The panels are not going to work as efficiently if they're dirty, if they're dusty. So panel cleaning might be a seemingly obvious one, but it can get quite technical because you want to be sure that you're not using any sort of abrasives, you're not harming or damaging or scratching those panels at all. The panel tracking as well, as it's part of that SCADA system that Lindsay was talking about. There's a huge amount of monitoring there to make sure the panels are tracking the sun effectively and absorbing as much of that UV as possible. Moving on to a more general sort of technical things, and I suppose this is where civils and electrical becomes very important. As Lindsay alluded to as well, the grid connection is something that's where there's a whole bunch of opportunity, particularly if the IPP has built that themselves. A lot of monitoring involved there just to make sure that the voltage and the frequency of the power that you're generating and connecting through to the grid is of a particular quality, and that there's a very steady supply of electricity. So from a technical side of things, I think there's a lot of monitoring involved there. And yeah, that might come through the contractors, but certainly there would be opportunities there to further down the supply chain. Next slide, please. So services. This I've sort of fleshed out. I think there's a huge amount of opportunity in terms of services that the plant would require, not necessarily relating specifically to the technical and the infrastructure of the renewable energy asset itself, but more peripheral sort of services to keep the whole plant going. First and foremost, there is a migrant labor force that's working on site. These are typically very skilled people. There are still any unskilled labor would typically come from the local community or from immediate surrounding areas. So the skilled labor is a migrant labor force. So any logistics and also accommodation, I think these are very obvious ones, but I think there's a huge amount of opportunity there, particularly for the local communities or anybody within that location. So I speak about transport, I speak about deliveries as well. We've spent quite a bit of site. If we go down to site, we have to go down for audits on an annual basis, for example. And something as simple, because you're in such a remote town, often very rural locations, you're staying in very temporary accommodation, even for medium term as well. You're there for quite a while. And something as simple as having lunch delivered to site is something we found ourselves really wanting for. Site can be anything from 10 to 50 Ks outside of town. And if you're staying in sort of temporary accommodation without being able to cook for yourself anyway, it was just a very simple, but I think a very, very effective opportunity. Think of logistics, not just in terms of supply, huge supply to the farm itself, to the plant itself. But logistics and deliveries is certainly an opportunity. Still just speaking a little bit about this migrant labor force, accommodation is an obvious one, either short-term or long-term, but think too about some sort of entertainment for these people, people are often away from families, so there's a whole host of arts and culture that you can bring in and entertain the staff complement with. So other services, Lindsay mentioned as well, the office is a big one. Every site will have sort of temporary prefab container type of offices. So there's all sorts of utilities maintenance involved there that can possibly come from the actual service provider or the supplier of these prefab buildings. But there's huge overheads as well. Again, just because of how remote these locations can be, there's huge overheads for people to have to travel to site to come and check on aircon maintenance, on water, electricity, sewage maintenance, and waste removal as well. So if you can tap into that supply chain of those suppliers of those buildings, get yourselves qualified, get yourselves on their list of suppliers. And yeah, the advantage that you could bring there, I suppose, in terms of being potentially local, is reduced overheads. We have a very hard time saying no to that. Cleaning and sanitization. I think in light of COVID as well, cleaning has taken on a whole new realm. And so certainly cleaning and sanitization of these offices and shared spaces is an opportunity. Wi-Fi and connectivity. A lot of the work that happens during O&M is very data intensive. As I mentioned, it's loads of monitoring, but it's very much IT based. And again, just by virtue of being so very remote, personally, in my experience, the Wi-Fi and connectivity has been shocking, or not at all like it is in the metropolitan areas. But it's a huge and important part of doing business there. So if you can come up with a solution there, bring all sorts of boosters and appeal to any sort of internet service providers to expand their networks. I mean, it's probably a long-term sort of ambition, but certainly there's a huge opportunity there. And I'll speak a little bit more about Wi-Fi and connectivity when we speak about the community development opportunities. Maintenance, general maintenance in terms of the infrastructure that's there. Again, this is something that Lindsay mentioned, and I think it just holds true for the whole 20-year PPA. Things like fences, things like roads, drainage, maintaining the grounds themselves in terms of landscaping. As soon as you now have an office and people eating food and generating waste, for example, in a remote location of Northern Cape, pests and rodents and all sorts of wildlife critters will obviously be attracted to that space as a food source. So keeping the grass short, for example, landscaping, and also the wildlife and pest control is another opportunity there. Speaking about wildlife and pest control, you want to be very conscious of your environmental impacts. You don't just want to kill on site necessarily, but snake handling and the supply of snake bite kits is something that is notoriously difficult to come by. So yeah, there's certainly opportunity there in terms of maintaining the grounds. Next slide, please. Can I have the next slide, please?
Next slide. Looks like we may have lost Danielle there. Let's just give it a minute to see if she can get back on. Okay, it looks like we have a bit of a technical glitch. We have lost Danielle. Just give us a bit of a second to try and get her back on. Okay, I think we are having a little bit of a trouble with connection from Danielle. Perhaps we can move a little bit forward so that we arrest time. I wonder if Lucky, are you ready to move straight away?
Good afternoon, Lindo. Yes, I am in. I am ready to move with my presentation.
Okay, lovely. Okay, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we will catch up on Danielle's as soon as connectivity improves and she comes back on. I think to move to the next topic, we're gonna be looking at commissioning. And commissioning is going to be presented by Lucky Ngedi from Matla Engineering Solutions. And Tlanhla holds an MBL postgraduate degree in management development, a Bachelor of Technology in Electrical Engineering, heavy current, and National Diploma in Power Engineering. He's a registered engineer with EXA, and alumni with U.S. Leadership Exchange Program, alumni of Danish Fellowship Program on Grid Integration of Renewable, and Mr. Ngedi has held several directorships in different organizations in the energy space. He's also played a role in the SADC region as an external expert, advising the Regional Electricity Regulator Association of Southern Africa. And he's also got a substantial regulatory experience, having worked with NERSA, as well as several years of experience in local government utilities and ESCOM. So Mr. Ngedi is currently an owner of the Matla Engineering Solution, providing the grid compliance services to the IPPs from 2015 to date, and having successfully worked with over 35 IPPs. So Mr. Ngedi is indeed an expert in this area. So we're going to hand it over to you, Lucky, to just tell us what are some of the opportunities in this niche area which you are a key expert on. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Lindo. Yes, the approach of my presentation, and good afternoon to everyone, to the chair, the colleagues in the panel, the presenters. Just as a protocol, I would like to say all protocol observed. I will start my presentation, outline the approach will be, I will present most of the work that happens at commissioning, especially on the grid code side. And towards the end of my presentation, I will start outlining, based on that on those services that I presented, what could be the potential opportunities, especially for young and upcoming engineers, for small Black businesses, small, medium enterprises as well. And so that will be my presentation approach. So I'm not going to go through the outline, but it's going to go through all the phases that you have to go through. Just before I go to this next slide, there is a document in the South African industry that is called the Grid Code. And the problem with this document is that the IPPs mostly think about it towards commissioning. And this is not a commissioning discussion. It's actually a design, commissioning, and post-COD discussion. But we see a lot of IPPs falling short because they think about the grid code as the secondary thing. They think the grid code is a by the way, and then they get the shock of their life when the system operator doesn't give them the COD letter because of this document called the grid code. We can move to the next slide. So what is the grid code? Obviously, it establishes reciprocal obligations of electricity supply industry participants regarding the connection and use of distribution and transmission power systems in the country, the development of the network and operation of the interconnected power systems. It also defines some minimum technical requirements for NSPs, generators, and load customers. Also ensures not discriminatory access to the interconnected power system by both generators and customers. There's the adherence, ensure that there's adherence to technical requirements, and it maintains the system integrity and adequate service delivery, defined accountabilities of the participants in the industry, and also ensures information availability when needed. Can we move to the next slide? So, but I think the introduction and the objectives, obviously it gives you that perspective of why you need to take the grid code quite seriously, unless you know that you are building the plant for your own use. But if you are going to connect to the system and operate commercially, the grid code should be the first thing you think of in the beginning before you actually conceptualize your project. You should be already thinking about the grid code before you choose your technology type, your series of your technology. Think about the grid code and what it wants and the technology or the technical requirements for the grid code. A lot of people think the grid code is too complicated and not user-friendly. Maybe, but for people like me, it becomes a bit of a Bible. It becomes my life, my everyday life. To assist, it feels quite great to see the independent power producers being given that allowance to operate commercially and start making money due to the work that I've done for them on the grid code. So basically, this is very important. This space of grid code, I must say, it's not too highly contested, but it is also highly contested. There's a few companies that are giving this service. In my head, I'm not thinking of more than 5 that are giving this service to the IPPs. So lots of opportunities if you want to sit down with the code and start engaging with it and understand what exactly does the code requires from the plants. So these are some of the requirements that you'd see in the Renewable Energy Code, just as a summary. Some of them, obviously, we are asking the plants to have a reactive power capability when they need to absorb reactive power or even to export reactive power to the network. There are certain requirements that the code puts and stipulates in for the IPPs and even for the NSPs as well. So it's not onerous. It's also asks the network services provider for some certain requirements as well. So it's not a document for IPPs or that is designed to frustrate the IPPs. So let me just get that clarity out there. So we have also some voltage and reactive power control requirements that are required for these plants. Some of these plants, they are actually connected on very strong networks or some in the weak networks. So they might be expected to actually give that voltage control kind of a capability to be able to provide for that expected reactive power that they need to absorb based on what the voltage conditions are in the grid, or needs to export based on what are the network conditions in the plant. So you would also have frequency tolerances, the requirements for frequency tolerances, as these IPPs are generated
Uh, it looks like again we are having a really challenging time with our connectivity. I see we have lost Lucky as well. Because I thought it was on my side, but it looks like it's definitely on his side. We have lost Lucky. Maybe we'll give him another chance to get back. I see Malova is saying the internet is tired. It's been a long year. Perhaps there is some truth to that, Malova. So maybe in the meantime, Danielle, we lost you. I think you had probably 3 slides to go. Maybe we can jump back to you, and we really apologize for this, and it's clearly not our own doing. It's the connectivity. So maybe we can get back to you, Danielle.
Sure, happy to. Just as I was talking about bad connectivity, so if there's any internet service providers out there, you're welcome to give me a call. Good. So yes, sorry, continuing then, speaking about opportunities in the operations and maintenance phase, branching out now into community development, and the opportunities that can be brought about by community development. So what I've been speaking about in the previous slide regarding the services, and now also going forward community development in my next slide, I hope it is clear what I'm trying to do is sort of flesh out the supply chain of all goods and services that the renewable energy asset itself might require, that the plant might require, that their presence in the local community might require. So it's not all related to just the generation of power. And I think if you can go through this exercise yourself, again, as Lindsay said, read engineering news, see who the names are, who's doing what, where, look at actual brands that are on site and tap into their respective supply chains. There's a whole branch of opportunity that opens up there. So the community development, this speaks a little bit, and I won't go into too much detail, but this stems from the commitments that the IPP project has within the local community, or within the geographic location that they're actually situated. So it's not to say necessarily that there are opportunities available directly for the market, although certainly there are. I'll speak a little bit about that in the next slide. But what I'm speaking about here is enterprise development commitments that the IPPs have, as well as socioeconomic development commitments. And with that, there is again a huge supply chain to tap into. So speaking about enterprise development, typically what the IPP tries to accomplish is look at any local businesses, local enterprises operating within the local community that don't necessarily form part of the IPP supply chain themselves, but rather looking at all your local bakeries, your local internet cafes, any other enterprises that exist within that community. So what they do in terms of developing those enterprises would be a whole host of training and development. It's bookkeeping courses, and it's management, and it's CIPC registrations, because again, because of how very remote these locations are, it's not very easy to just go online, for example, because they don't have that connectivity. It's not easy to go down to the local CIPC office because it simply just doesn't exist. So trying to find local service providers that can help formally register these little companies, and as I mentioned, do a whole host of training and development for them, marketing and bookkeeping and anything that's going to help formalize them and empower them and upskill them. So if you can see yourself tapping into that as a sort of training and development service provider for small enterprises, that's it. Further, in terms of the enterprise developments objectives that the IPP has, we typically see that there's a lot of infrastructure supply. So looking at your small scale farmers, for example, we did a lot of this up in Limpopo. We'll provide infrastructure like fencing or boreholes or generators or ovens for a little bakery, for example. So there's a lot of infrastructure supply and then installation. And I'll speak about this in a second when I speak a bit more about construction and renovation. But purchasing a JoJo tank, for example, is not necessarily a very difficult thing to do, but having it delivered to a very remote site, thinking back now again to the logistics we spoke about in the previous slide, and getting that installed in a way that is of top quality, is going to last, it's not going to come back to the IPP as potentially providing faulty products. That's something that's very, very important, is knowing that whatever goods and services you offer are going to be of a very high standard. So moving then on to the socioeconomic development commitments that the IPPs have. So typically what's very much top of mind in the last few years, and I think now even more so, is education. That's a very important focal area, along with health and wellness. And although you might not immediately see yourself situated within that, think about construction and renovation. Typically schools are being repainted, windows being installed, floors being reconcreted, supply of toilets and installation of toilets at a lot of these schools. So there's, again, a huge branch of opportunity when it comes to the upliftment and empowering of schools, of principals, of teachers as well. And that's not limited to the physical infrastructure of the schools necessarily. That's also then speaking again about training and development. Training new teachers, trying to encourage youth to be mentors to younger pupils as well, tutoring in all sorts of subjects. So yeah, certainly in terms of education, there's a whole supply chain there. I mean, health and well-being. I think a lot of IPPs, particularly in the last year, have done incredible work with supplying PPEs to various clinics and hospitals. But more than that, it's pre-COVID times in any case. It's also been the supply of prefab buildings to try and build extra capacity at the clinics. Also construction and renovation of existing clinics as well. Tapping then into supply of medical equipment. I mean, certainly I don't think the IPPs want to touch, a supply of drugs. I mean, it's hugely regulated and certainly not something that they'd want to get into. But, gloves, gauze, plasters, sanitizers, certainly it's something very generic and low level in terms of medical supplies, certainly is something that they look into as well. Moving on then to the more general side of things, not specifically to ED and SED, I think I've alluded to it already, is logistics. I cannot emphasize enough how often we have, for example, food rollout programs, food parcel rollout programs, especially now during COVID, and always wanting to use local suppliers as far as possible. That's genuinely a very important priority for a lot of these IPPs. But transport, I keep mentioning transport, but it's difficult to come across somebody within the local communities who have buckies, who are able to transport goods, who are able to transport people as well. And as with anything, you want to be qualified. You don't want to transport people, especially kids. If we have sports tournaments, for example, we want to transfer kids from one school to another. That's something that you don't want to take a risk with. So you can't be, you definitely don't actually, shall I say, want to rock up in a skadonk with a driver's license that's expired, for example. There's some minimum requirements that absolutely have to be in place. But yeah, again, just the virtue of being so very remote, logistics can serve a function in so many different shapes and forms. So if you are within the local community, and if you have the means, I would certainly recommend, looking into that as an opportunity. Something else that I've mentioned here, just very generally, becoming a mentor, tapping into that network. So the IPPs would have community liaison officers, and certainly their role would be to to tap into a network of local service providers, local opportunities, needs and challenges as well. So that doesn't mean it has to come exclusively from a single person's network, but if you have something to offer in terms of ideas, opportunities, projects that you want to propose as well, that's going to benefit people within that immediate locale, then certainly bring that to the table as well. Lastly, on community development, something that IPPs are starting to speak a lot more about at the moment is over and above the financial commitments and implementation of projects, financial commitments they have, and the implementation of projects within these local communities. They're starting to speak more and more about monitoring and evaluation. I think it's dawned on a lot of people that the projects that we're doing at the moment need to have proper traction. They need to have proper impact within those local communities. So it might have been seen as luxurious perhaps in the past, but it is becoming slightly more academic in nature. And what's required there are boots on the ground in terms of data management and analysis, actually going to all of the schools and tracking the progress of pupils' performance, for example. So certainly monitoring and evaluation, and then reporting back to the IPP with recommendations on how projects might be able to be improved is also something that's fast becoming a very hot topic. Next slide, please. Thanks. So this is the last slide of mine. Speaking about supplier development. So certainly the projects, particularly from round 4 onwards, do have commitments towards supplier development. There are, of course, a whole bunch of criteria that come along with this. The supplier in question would need to be part of the IPP's supply chain, first and foremost, as well as be an EME/QSE, Black-owned, women-owned, or rural youth-owned as well. But once you are within that supply chain, I think it's important to just note that there are further opportunities available there if you ever wanted to even further expand your skill set or your capabilities in general. So I won't carry on too much more about that because I believe it has been covered in quite a lot of detail in another webinar. So I've just provided a link there to all of Sawia's other webinars, where not only this talk about supply development, but I'm sure you'll find a lot of very other interesting content there as well. So speaking about company documents, again, this is what Lindsay was alluding to with the minimum requirements. And of course, hers was a bit more technical and detailed than mine, but certainly you have to be a registered entity. You have to have a BE certificate. You have to have evidence of a valid bank account. You want to have a track record as well. So definitely do get all of those documents in order if you haven't done so already. I think as a small startup, it's very easy to get a BE certificate. It's simply an affidavit and somebody who knows how to complete that. But don't wait for documents to be asked. Rather, go the extra mile, put a bundle together that is something that will be asked for. Don't wait for them to ask for that. And then the last thing I'd like to speak about is procurement procedures. So in developing suppliers, in presenting opportunities, in bringing Black, youth, women-owned vendors into the supply chain, I think there's a few things that we can talk about there. The first one I wanted to chat about is drafting proposals. So something that we've been assessing quite a bit of some, responses to RFPs. We've been helping to vet service providers, specifically on we were involved in trust administration and local community development, and more recently a little bit with the supply chain to the IPPs themselves. And something that we, in my experience anyway, have found particularly frustrating is the proposals that we receive, not in the format that we requested. There's gaps, there's documents that are missing. There's grammar errors, it's seemingly silly things. And yes, somebody assessing that might be able to put 2 and 2 together. Someone assessing it might be able to read between the lines. But if you're busy reviewing 20 different proposals, you know, one that doesn't sort of meet all of your very basic administrative criteria can so easily be pushed to the bottom of the pack, or maybe even not reviewed at all. So certainly in all of our tender submission, you know, we always take the conservative approach. We always assume that what's being requested is a lot more than what's actually written. And that's, yeah, short and concise is definitely the way to go. But the quality, yeah, I think just don't let there be any gaps in proposals or in quotes or anything like that. It's, yeah, it's quite a pain, I must say. So anyway, just the quality of your response to any RFPs that you do happen to come across, really do pay attention to that. Last 2 points that I want to make is the contracting structure. And again, thanks to Lindsay for pointing that out. I think it's very important to speak about, or for people looking to enter into the supply chain to understand how that contracting structure works. Certainly the IPPs do prefer to have a fully wrapped solution, with the exception of a few professional services, for example, that the IPP would procure themselves. But it is at the contractor and the subcontractor level that anybody looking to enter the supply chain needs to make those connections. It's really with the contractors and their own procurement policies that you need to try to understand, that you need to try to tap into and be compliant with. It's at that level that those relationships need to be built. And that'll help you tap into not only renewable energy opportunities, but any sort of construction, engineering, procurement, and technical maintenance opportunities as well. So that'll only further broaden your horizons. So certainly direct your attention to contractors and subcontractors as well. And then the last thing that I wanted to speak about is industry associations. Again, Lindsay did mention, you know, reach out to your industry associations, become members of those industry associations. Even within the local communities as well, you'll always find there's some sort of business forum or chamber of commerce of some sort. So tap into those networks. But similarly, I would like to task you know, industry associations themselves to normalize being a lot more transparent in terms of what the typical procurement procedures are of their members. You know, something as simple as, and I hope any engineers or anybody listening to this doesn't roll their eyes or get a bit frustrated with me, but I would possibly encourage wanting to make public bill of quantities. That can be massive and not to the detriment of the competitive advantage that IPPs would have over one another, because this is a very, very competitive industry in terms of tariff and also in terms of economic development. So without giving away any trade secrets, it can be totally anonymous. It can be 3 responses that over the years are then perhaps built up into 10 responses, and fine-tuning those. But can we make public a list of the bill of quantities as well as the technical and quality specifications? Let's put it out there. Let's you know, allow people to see for themselves where it is that they can slot in, and maybe not rely solely on who you know and who you've had a chance to network with. But let's make that public possibly. Is there a way for us to simplify RFPs that is cognizant of, you know, the limitations in capacity, for example, of small enterprises who don't have huge track records, who don't necessarily have huge cash flows either? You know, are contractors maybe willing to push down their supply chain, or shall I say push forward through their supply chain expectations of needing to contract from EMEs and QSEs? Certainly that's a commitment and an obligation that the IPPs have made down to their contractors. Can we see that being pushed down further and further until we reach the cartridge supplier in Kutu, for example? You know, can we get a bit more creative with those procurement policies? Perhaps, and this is something I've spoken about before, is getting a bit creative with with co-contracting. You know, get your small youth-owned, women-owned vendor to co-contract with a more experienced supplier or service provider. You know, is there some sort of advantage that contractors can offer to their suppliers and service providers down the value chain? Is there some sort of incentive that you can provide to them to co-contract and sort of take under their wing? You know, that we can just see these small Black youth women-owned vendors getting that experience and tapping into the supply chain, and in future then being in a position to pay it forward as well. That's my 2 cents.
Thanks a lot, Danielle. That's a very mouthful, and I love some of the propositions and thought-provoking ideas you're putting there at the end. I think it will only help the industry for the better. I think, ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the going up and down to one speaker and the other. We had a bit of a challenge with Danielle and then Lucky, and then Lucky is now back. And I know we just started with Lucky. Lucky, can I just proceed just to get Shanda's contribution, and then we will come back to you so that we give you sufficient time for your presentation. I know Shanda has to run shortly after the presentation. Shanda, are you ready?
Yes, I am.
Yes, you are. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, now just to get a consultant perspective from the renewable energy value chain, I think we would like to get the sense of how, from a consulting experience, how do you see the opportunities? Where do you see the potential for up and coming consultants to thrive in this sector? So Shanda is going to do that for us. Shanda is a professional engineer with 15 years experience in renewable energy and power sector. And she has extensive working experience in technical business development and execute capacity in African, American, and European markets. She also has successful track record of identifying and successfully converting new business opportunities in both developed and emerging markets. And she has supported financial close for up to 150 megawatts wind from Senegal, and has served as transaction advisory for 375 megawatts solar PV projects and 100 megawatt wind projects for Old Mutual investment groups. She has also assisted in development, negotiation, and review of EPC and OEM contractual agreement arrangements for wind and solar projects. Shanda has mastered engineering and economics and management from the University of Oxford, and she has an undergraduate degree in French and international politics, as well as sociology of race and ethnicity. She's fluent in English and French and has proficiency in Germany and Portuguese. And we're going to test this fluency by asking her to greet us in French.
Tu veux que je parle français? Vraiment, je parle français. Thanks, Lindo. So my intervention is a little bit different from the previous 2 speakers. I've done minimal slides, mostly because I'm exhausted and it's the end of the year and you can see my exhaustion. But also because what I wanted to talk about is, I guess, the reality on the ground of being on the other side from the IPPs and trying to get access to the opportunities and how I've gone about doing that, what that looks like really. Harmatan, if you can go to the next slide. Just for those of you, you can go to the next one, sorry, it was just our blurbs. So to give you an idea of who we are, which I think then fits into the perspective that I'm giving you, we are a technical consultancy that provides services with IPPs and to lenders and equity participants in projects in South Africa and really across the wider continent, so sub-Saharan Africa. We are a Black women-owned vendor. There's now 8 of us that are full-time employees. We started the business, I'd say, properly in March of 2020, which was terrible timing in the middle of COVID, but also good timing. I think all of the benefits of being able to do things digitally helped us. But really, we are a bunch of engineers that provide services that along the lines of what Lindsay was talking about. So design services, feasibility assessments, resource assessments, construction monitoring and operations monitoring. So if you can go to the next slide. And so on that basis, what I've kind of said or tried to go through here is the key ingredients of how we have structured the business and worked our way into the shape that it looks like now. I think everybody has said, go on LinkedIn, go on LinkedIn. Really, one of the key things is promoting what you can offer. I think what we, on the other side, the IPPs are busy working with or seeing a lot of different players and a lot of different entities that want to provide services for them. So the more you can shout about what you can do and offer and that you become a known brand or entity, the easier it is for you to be selected or to be added to those RFPs when they go out. Because unless they know who you are, that you're not going to have sight of those things. So that promotion element is really key. A lot of what the previous presenters have talked about as well is this track record. And I think Lindsay raised this, and it's really important, for us, the company essentially started in March of 2020, but the team have lots of experience, and you need to be able to use those transferable skills or previous experience that you've had in previous lives and package that appropriately so that it fits into what the requirements are in the tenders. And I think that from what Danielle is saying, really very important to read what you're being asked to deliver on and respond to that accurately, whether it be for you or for the team that you're kind of putting a proposal in for. The networking, again, from the chats in the background, networking is really key. Everything is about relationships. We posted on our LinkedIn the other day, you can do a sales pitch or you can make a friend. And I think what we look at is building those relationships and that loyalty, because someone is much more likely to come back to you if they like you and they know you and you've built a proper relationship with them. So I think it's also very important to understand that networking is not just let me send out a bunch of random marketing emails. Take the time to get to know people, to understand actually what they want, to ask them questions, to build something with them that is mutually beneficial for both sides of the party. Marketing, I think, we have spent a lot of time, and it's, I think also what we need to think about, and let me take a step back from the marketing. As small companies, and we are also a small company, there's not a lot of spare cash going around to invest in marketing and joining associations and things like that. But build things up over time, right? Everything doesn't have to happen in the first month of your existence. You do what you can in the beginning, and then things can change. I mean, you look at some of the bigger companies as well. They've had 4 or 5 rebrands as they go through different stages of their life cycle, and that's okay. It might not be the prettiest thing in the beginning, but you'll get there. So take time. I've said build relationships again. Clearly, that's very important. a willingness to be broke. I think all of us want to set up businesses and deliver services and have an idea of how smoothly it's going to go. It takes time. I mean, it generally takes about 6 months for you to even get your first client from setting things up. So be willing to persevere, know that you're not going to have clients for the first few months, that you are going to have to keep knocking on those doors and having those conversations until something comes through. And I think that's something that we don't often talk about. So if you're going from a salaried job or a salaried position, have those savings in place and understand that, you know, they are likely to be run down for a little bit. Know your limits. We see this not only in our own team, but with, you know, competitors. It's okay to say no, and you can't take on everything. So what can you and can you not do? How many days are you able to work? How many projects can you handle? And all of that to make sure that you deliver a good service to your client, right? Because especially if you're small, the South African market is very, very small. People talk. You don't want to tarnish your relationship, and it's very easy, or your reputation. It's very easy to do so by taking on too much and then not being able to deliver on the promises that you've made to a client that you've spent all of this time trying to get on board. And then my last point on here is really just keep on keeping on, right? It'll work out. It may take time, it may take perseverance, but you've got to be willing to push through that to get and build up your business and get on and be successful. You can go to the next one. So what I've tried to do here is kind of the steps, I guess, that I had to go through, and this is, I'd say, the third iteration of a business that I've gone through trying to set up myself. So when I say that keep on keeping on, you know, it may not work the first time. And I think part of that building of the track record is also going into different roles and different companies and learning things and refining what your vision is for your company. And making sure that you really truly understand what you're delivering. So what do you want to offer and what can you offer? Those might not be the same things. Ideally they are, but defining that and putting limits on what you are able to do and not do. I'm going to jump down to the one at the bottom because I think Danielle really spoke about this and it really resonates. So identifying what you can offer doesn't mean taking yourself out of opportunities, right? I think sometimes we look at this whole thing as such a competition. There's a huge market there. We need power. We have load shedding. We have issues. There is a lot going on, and the energy business is going to exist for a very long time. So I think we should look at it as the pie is big enough for everybody. Work with people, form those partnerships. So knowing the things that you can't do, if there's a tender that's out there or an RFP that you can do 50% off, find a partner that you can work with in order to deliver on the whole scope. I think those things are really important, and especially in acknowledging your limits where you are able to deliver means that you then will provide a better service to the company that you're providing that service for. So back up to the second one, what gap do you fill? You know, and it's unlikely that you're going to be completely unique in the market, but find what it is that is special about your company, about you, about the service that you're delivering. What is your mantra? I think I'm not allowed to swear on webinars. Ours is no very mean people would say bad words, either internally or externally. We really would like to have positivity. And I think you need to also, in that sense, know what your limits are. You know, are you willing to take on something that is detrimental to you and your sanity just in order to win a client? You may be, we are not, and that's one of our key kind of guiding principles. What skills are required? So, you know, in our business, I very much prefer doing the business development. I am an engineer, yes, and I do deliver on projects, but my colleague Adam is the techie geek, and we have other people that have different skills. It's also about knowing that you on your own can't deliver everything and finding those right people. I think for those of you that are on here that are looking for jobs in the consultancy business, I think adding on to what Danielle said about the applications for RFPs and things like that, I'd give you a similar feedback in terms of CVs and applications for jobs. Spelling mistakes really make people's eyes cross. You know, if you're going to be delivering on a service for someone, you need to be able to have that attention to detail and ensure that what you are doing is accurate and correct. And if you can't do that with your CV, which you have lots of time to spend on, how are you going to do that with a client? So take the time to really understand what you're applying for and make sure that all of your documentation is accurate and precise. Staff wisely as a consultancy. You know, your people are basically your company is your people, right? And that's what you're selling, and that's what you're delivering on, is people's ability to facilitate whatever service that you're doing. So in our case, engineering services, it's very important to us that those people fit into the culture and are able to deliver well. Be clear on your ideal client. I guess that fits in as well with your mantra. So who are you looking to talk to? You're not going to be a perfect fit for every IPP or every client, but understanding what where the likely synergies are will make your life easier. So you have a specific target market. Understand what your market is, how people are pricing. I think it's similar to what Danielle was saying about the BOQs, but just understand what rates are in the market, where the industry is heading. Do research, look at the articles on LinkedIn, talk to people, and you know, that all feeds into then what gap do you fill? Are you going to be low cost? Are you going to be high cost? Are you going, you know, where are you fitting in, and how does that link to your specialization? And then, yes, I've done the forming partnerships, and really, I think, make sure that you are communicating with as many people as possible to refine things, and your business will change, it'll evolve as you go along. I think what we looked like in March of 2020 is very different to what we look like now, and it'll continue to change in order to be better, and again, that's okay, and you'll make mistakes as you go along the way. Just stand back up again, fix them. It'll be okay. That is, I'm hoping that I covered everything that you guys wanted to cover, but please ask questions. If there's my contact details, if you want to reach out. Thanks, Linda.
Okay, thanks a lot. I like the checklist at the end. Some of those questions seems like obvious, but when you start asking them, it really brings you closer to that idea that you want to pursue. Thank you very much, Shanda. In view of the time, Lucky, I see you are back. If we could give you maybe another 8 to 10 minutes, if at the most, if you could try and push with speed in the remaining slides that you were having, so that at least we give our participant all the perspectives you were going to share.
Thank you very much, Chair. And quite an irony that we are busy talking about energy and my lights went off. Now I had to actually switch over to the generator, luckily. So I just don't want to pose any risk. I'm not even going to show the video, just to make sure that I finish this presentation, because I don't know what could go wrong. So let me just try and quickly, I think everyone has seen my face already. I think maybe if you can assist with sharing the presentation again, I'm going to try to keep it within the 8 to 10 minutes.
Okay. Just getting that in order
Is anyone sharing, Chair?
Yeah, we are trying to get it back to the slides. Winning Kifua. Okay, there you go. I think if you can tell us in which slide you wanted to start.
I think we were at exactly this one, Chair. Just to quickly share an overview of the requirements for the grid code, I'm going to move very swiftly. I was on frequency tolerances that are required from the plant, and also frequency support that the plants would be expected by the grid code. Also, there would be requirements, certain requirements around active power control. Obviously, things changes quite quickly on the intermittent energy space. So the system operator at times might ask you to have some certain capabilities to control active power in your plant. Obviously, fault right through control, which is FRT. Some of the requirements that your plant would be expected to be able to ride through a fault without disconnecting. So basically, that informs how you design and actually choose your technology for your plant. More importantly, signals, communication, and control. You build everything, but if you don't have the eyes to see what is happening out there and how you can control whatever it is that the grid code wants, then you are as good as not existing. So we can move to the next slide. So obviously other requirements that I didn't talk about were like the electrical protection. There are grid code requirements for electrical protection as well. There are grid code requirements for power quality as well. So what are the technologies that are regulated by the codes? I'm not going to go through them. I'm going to just assume that you can all see the slides, and I think you have an idea what technologies are the codes regulating. I think recently we had a battery storage code also approved. So which means that there would be requirements for those who will be installing some big or utility scale battery energy storage as well. We can move to the next slide. So there is this document that that's the system operator usually gives to the IPPs. It's called the Grid Code Compliance Matrix. When you look at it, it looks like a very simple Excel spreadsheet, but it's quite a difficult document to complete, because in order for that document to be complete, all the stages of the grid code need to have been done and also completed and populated into this document. I'm talking about grid code studies. I'm talking about power quality requirements. I'm talking about protection and even the testing itself. You might look at this document as a spreadsheet and I will just be finished in an hour. This is something that is completed right throughout the project, a very deliberate document, and it's quite challenging to complete for some of the IPPs. So basically, if you are a consultant, or if an IPP has a consultant that is unable to pass through some of the stages of the requirements, this document will always be an outstanding matter, and it's also part of those documents that must be complete in order for you to get that commercial operation date letter. We can move to the next slide. I think this is what I've explained already. So as I said earlier, before I got disconnected, the project lifecycle on grid code is actually on all cycles of the code. There's design phase, where you are still talking about the plan layout, and there's commissioning phase, now when you have everything on the ground and expected to do all the testing and commissioning that is needed and get that COD letter from the buyer's office. And then post COD, obviously here, these are some of the things that the process of the grid code allow you to do post getting the COD letter. I think there's one block that is left there, which is a 6-year testing, 6-year grid code testing. The code also requests or requires all the plants to undergo almost the very same process for grid code compliance after 6 years. So after 6 years, these plants must check because a lot of things changed within 6 years. There are modifications done in the plant. There's a lot of changes in terms of the sizes, in terms of the technology, your inverters or your panels. So even the losses, they become higher with the cables becoming older. So you have to retest at 6 years, check compliance is still at the level where the system operator will be expecting. Next slide. So now going into the design phase. So obviously at the design phase, a lot of simulation will be done because there is nothing on the ground yet. So this is where we will be doing a lot of protection studies, protection settings, grid studies using some softwares like Power Factory. So we do the grid code studies according to those requirements that I've shown you 2 slides ago. All those requirements, the simulations through relevant softwares can be able to be done. So basically at design stage here, you have designed your plant and you have chosen your technology at conceptual stage, and you have chosen your type of turbine or your type of inverter, whatever your generator might be, and you have done some type tests. You've got the type test certificates and models coming from the OEMs. So basically all this data is used as an input into the modeling and grid studies that are done for grid code compliance for these plants. Then can you move to the next slide? So basically this is what I've been explaining in the previous slide about what happens at design stage. So all those requirements for the grid code that I was talking about earlier, you would be expected to do a simulations report through a relevant software. I don't want to keep on saying Power Factory, but I think Power Factory is mostly famous in this space, and it's mostly widely accepted, especially by ESCOM. But I don't want to sound like I'm advertising Power Factory, because I think also there is another one that is currently being used and now, which is PSCAD as well. Move to the next slide. Now we're going to talk about some of those. I think here I was just illustrating some of the results you would see in a report of a grid code compliance studies, where you are doing a high voltage right-through simulations, reactive power capability according to the figure that the grid code will give you. You will do those simulations using all the data for the plant to see that the plant is within that range that the grid code is requiring, or is it out of that range. So basically, obviously, also you do reactive current injection, you do 20-degree phase jump. So all of these things you do to test if the design concept of your plant will comply to the grid code when it's on the ground. So this is an opportunity where actually this document or this report, this grid studies simulation report, is quite so important, because it gives you an opportunity to even change your design of the plant if the results are telling you that, no, I'm not going to comply to reactive power. Then you amend your design and you request that maybe the plant should have reactive power compensation. Then you add the reactive power compensation into the model of the plant. Then the plant, I'm just making an example, then the plant, you run the simulations again, then the plant is able to now give the reactive power that is needed with the support of a reactive power compensation. It's just but one example of some things that could be done through these simulations at design level. Next slide.
We can wrap up, Lucky.
Okay, so commissioning stage, if you can go to the next slide, commissioning stage is mostly where you are now doing the testing according to the grid code requirements. So what we've been doing on the simulations, most of those requirements, now the plant is on the ground and you are going through commercial commissioning of your plant. Obviously, the system operator will come and witness that the plant on the ground can be able to go through or pass all those stages or all those tests that are required by the grid code. Slide, next slide. So these are monitoring and control that you need. Obviously, it's key that you have control for your plant, and the grid code also requires some signals. It's got a signal list that it requires for the IPP. So obviously your control devices and system should be able to give the system operator all the signals that the grid code requires. Next. So this is just an illustration of the type of test you would get from commissioning. You get the results in raw data, and then you start plotting to see if the plant was really reaching those set points that you were issuing, and it was reaching it within a certain period of time, and the tolerances for that performance or capability the grid code would require. Next slide. I think this is also still an illustration. The first illustration was on the set of active power test. Then now this is on the set of reactive power test. Continue. So post COD, continue to the next slide. I'm wrapping up, Chair. So these are some of the things that you need to do at post COD, your RMS model validation, and then your EMT also model validation. You conclude your power quality using the data now that is on the plant. If you had any exemption, that you start closing your exemptions. Next slide. So this is just a last slide, which is just sharing what could be the opportunities around this space. Lots of opportunities here, especially you don't see much of African companies in this space. I could say that I'm the only African company that is in this space, and we are still very small companies. So in competition with very big companies, some of the challenges that you find there is that maybe your big companies, they would actually just reduce the prices of the services to unsustainable level, because obviously they are big companies, they could sustain themselves on other services. Then as a small company, you start being forced to reduce your prices in order to compete with the bigger companies. But some of the things that you could get a niche on is the plant designing, power pack controller design, projects management right through the value chain of the project, grid interconnection studies, which are studies that you do before the plant is designed to look at the capacity in the network or the grid to see if you could be able to connect certain amount of megawatts to actually build that plant in that certain location. So those studies are actually informing where could you build those plants as well. Modeling and grid code studies, I've already talked to that. Testing and commissioning of these plants on the grid code parts, that's also an opportunity. Control and communication, very key. O&M, obviously these plants beyond COD, they need operations and maintenance. You need to get certain certificates that will qualify you to be able to get these contracts for O&M, and you could be in the system for the next 15 to 20 years because the PPAs are that long. So big opportunities there. Power quality studies, obviously that's a very deep and technical subject, which is very interesting for engineers. Protection studies and commissioning, protection maintenance and testing, a lot of grid access engineer opportunities in IPPs, and also a lot of grid code engineer opportunities in the consulting space. So next slide. I think that was the last slide. This is just some of our clients that we work with. I just thought for interest's sake, we should show it on this presentation. Thanks.
Oh, thank you. Thanks a lot. Like it's quite a technical field, and also thank you for profiling some of those opportunities there at the end. And we will definitely share these slides with all the participants. So feel free to follow through, and the contact details of all the presenters are at the end of their slides during after they have been presenting. Without any further waste of time, and I know Navesh, you're going to kill me next time you see me, to handle the next two items. It's been a pleasure to moderate this session, and I'll hand over back to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lindo. I think we're running out of time very quickly, so I'd just like to appeal to the participants to bear with us another 5 to 10 minutes. I'm going to do the question and answer segment in a rapid fire style. So Kefu, can I ask you to please bring down the slides, and then presenters, can I please ask you to turn on your camera so we can engage with our audience? Thank you very much. We don't have too many questions. I'm going to go through them very quickly. Lindsay, the first question is for you from EDF point of view, and it's a very topical question at the moment with regards to local manufacturing and local components particularly. So the question is from Chris Alsfeld, and the question goes, what components did EDF procure locally? I'm not sure if you can share that with us, commercially sensitive or not, in the South African wind and solar PV plants in South Africa in round 5. And in your opinion, what components do you think can competitively be manufactured locally for future rounds?
So obviously from a round 5 perspective, we've only just been awarded those projects. So we've got a view on where we're going to land. The minimum local content that was required was 40%. We think we're going to land somewhere around about 50%, which is great. And that's an improvement on round 4 even. So that's as much as I can say at the moment, unfortunately. But in terms of what can competitively be manufactured locally in future, I mean, there's so many factors at play for what can be manufactured competitively here, because what you've got to remember is a lot of the components, and here we're talking about things like inverters here, and the tracking structures, the PV panels in particularly. Sometimes even we're talking about turbine internals, gearboxes, that kind of thing. They are manufactured in China. And so there's global forces at play here that, you know, our DTI, our DMRE, there's a lot more that is going to influence what can be competitively localized. And it's not really something that I can answer as an IPP. That's really a sort of question for DMRE, DTI, and the OEMs themselves. But from an IPP perspective, we continue to push for as much localization as is possible within the market framework.
Excellent, thank you for that. Daniel, I see you have your hand up. You feel free to contribute.
Yes, just to add to that, what we're seeing going forward in the requirements of the DMRE tenders is they're bringing DTIC requirements into how we construct the local content. So as Lindsay mentioned, there's a minimum requirement of 40% local content, but they're now getting a lot more granular in terms of what components need to be supplied. And DTIC has got a very comprehensive list, which perhaps we can share as well along with this presentation to all of the members. They've got a very comprehensive list with a local content percentage for each and every single component. And that's maybe something useful just to share with all as well.
Thank you, Danielle. I'd also like to encourage industry to follow the South African Renewable Energy Master Plan process. And Danielle, yes, the designation allocations are also important, so we'll share that with the presentation after the session. Thank you for that, colleagues. Chanda, I know that you need to leave, so I'm going to pose a question to you before you go. I see there's a comment here from Mandil Wetu, who says, we are a new company that just started 3 months ago. And she feels that will count against them if applying in the wind farm or the wind industry. But they do have 5 years of experience working in the field for another company, so they have personal experience. And you've spoken about how to package this going forward as a small company. Can you shed some light on this?
Just share all of the secrets. So look, your experience is still your experience. The wording that we have in our proposals is the team have worked on these projects.
which they have, right? And so whether it, some of the projects are as Harmattan, and that list grows as we go along, but when you first start off, it's perfectly fine to use your experience because you and the team worked on those. I think just be very honest that don't try and claim it as your company experience. And so that's why we clarify that it is the team that has worked on these. But it shouldn't disqualify you from participating. Just make sure that you are very clear in how you draft it.
Excellent. Thanks, Chanda. Lindsay, there's another question for you from Jean-Ray, and just to note that he's also asking for your contact details, so you can please share those with him if you're comfortable. But his question is, what are your views on grid access projects in terms of contracting that more works in your favor as the IPP, the EPC model approach or multi-contract model?
So if we're talking about grid access, we're actually not even talking about EPC or multi-contract, really. We're talking about whether or not it's a self-build or an EFCOM build, and the answer is always a self-build. I mean, we're even going to try and do a self-build at 400 kV on our round 5 projects because we have control over time and cost. So that is without a doubt the preference for us. When it comes to whether or not the overall project is an EPC or a multi-contract approach, that depends a lot more on other factors around the particular project and what we're offered. We'll always look at 2 options as a possibility, and then we'll narrow down towards the end of the bid period as to exactly how we want to structure it and what we want to do. I mean, if you take even just EDF Renewables over the last sort of 10 years, our round 2 projects, were all EPC. Wesley, the round 4 project, was an EPC, but now our future projects are going to be multi-contract because we've reached that sort of organizational maturity that we can take on a multi-contract. So there's many factors that play on that decision.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I see there's 2 more questions from Kamukelo. And Lindsay, the one is directed to you, and this is talking about the WTG technicians. And really what Kamukelo is saying is that they have experience, there's no work in the particular company that they are at. How do they get access to this? And I think from a solar PV point of view, Supplier has been good in creating a platform called PV Professionals, where we do advertise jobs in the sector. So our member companies do provide us with those scopes or job profiles, and we advertise that effectively on that platform and through our social media. And so WIA does the same on their social media, so you can follow both the associations for that, and that's for free, or sign up to one of those programs or initiatives. But Lindsay, from your point of view, what is your take on this, with skills being lost due to no work at companies?
It's sad, and it unfortunately is as a result of the delays that we saw between the bidding rounds for round 4 and the delay that it's taken. I think it's been 6 years for us to see a new bidding round for round 5. So it's a really awful situation. I'm very sorry that you're in that position. Unfortunately, we don't, as EDF Renewables, we don't have an O&M arm, so we don't do our own operations and maintenance. And the only suggestions I would really have at the moment is that perhaps this is somewhere that SOEA maybe needs to step in a similar manner that SAPVIA has with that initiative that you've got as SAPVIA there, Nivishan. That's the best kind of solution I have, or potentially to look at starting your own third-party company offering turbine technician services as a third party. There has to be an opportunity there. If you've got experience and you've got experience from previous companies and working with previous OEMs, why not give it a shot and see if it flies?
Thanks, Lindsay. It looks like Kamukelo is in that place where she's sitting with the skills and doesn't know whether to do it as a third party, as an entrepreneur, or get employed in the industry. But there must be some kind of requirement to get some work out of this space. And then that comes to the last question that she posed, is that do SMMEs really stand a chance in bidding? And here I'm assuming that it's bidding for the REAP program particularly. So Lindsay, I'm gonna hold on you because you've answered a few questions. I'm gonna hand over to Daniel. Daniel, can you give us an opinion on where you think SMMEs can play in the bidding process? And then Lucky, I'm gonna come to you as a consultant in the space, finding your place in the value chain. Also, where do SMMEs play? Is it better to fit into the value chain, or is there better chances to bid in the REAP program? So Daniel, let's start with you.
Certainly. So I think generally, as Chanda was mentioning earlier, energy is such a big problem in this country. And the REIPP program has provided a huge amount of opportunity, certainly. And bidding within that supply chain, I'd say definitely is a possibility. You know, the IPP did have a small IPP program. Unfortunately, that has since sort of fell off the radar, but the intention with that program is to have up to 5 megawatts generated and directed to you know, small scale local developers. Renewable energy opportunities beyond the IPP program are also very quickly becoming a huge space for opportunity. You know, speaking about NERSA, who published a regulation this year that said that up to 100 megawatts can be generated without a license if it's going to be for self-consumption. So enter into the conversation all of your mines, all of your ports, all of your major industries that are now looking to generate their own electricity as well. And solar and wind are definitely what the technologies that people are looking to there. So, you know, over and above the REIPP program by DMRE, my recommendation would be to keep an eye out to any other RFPs coming out of the private sector. I think there's a huge amount of opportunity there for sure.
Thank you, Danny. Lucky, do you want to provide some feedback on that as well? Lucky, you're on mute if you're speaking.
Thank you, Niveshan. Yes, I think this one, especially where we are, it's quite a difficult one. I'll just give you an example. I don't know if I will still consider my company as an SMME, but maybe I should. We've been trying to get into the bidding space through the BE partnerships with the bigger project developers. Some requirements that a company of my size would not really maybe meet in terms of your balance sheets and all those kind of things. So basically, this is quite a challenge. I wouldn't have an answer for it, but we have really made some strides at the EPC level. Our services have been getting much more traction at EPC level. So for the small medium enterprises, I think there is a lot of work around the EPCs, because EPCs, yes, they're engineering procurement contractor, but they cannot do everything. So there is a lot of work that still needs to be done by small medium enterprises under the EPC. A lot of technical work, even including getting into a space of getting a contract beyond the COD for certain service under the O&M. But these are some of the things that need you as a consultant or as a business to always have your ears on the ground. The space is not so open in terms of the tender process. Some of the IPPs, they decide to just headhunt whoever they want. So it's very hard to sort of know who is looking for what, so that I can put together a tender document and submit to that IPP. So most of the IPP would say, I worked with so and so in the past, and I prefer him. So they are not actually bound by the government policies on procurement. So they don't have to they don't have to do 3 quotations or whatever it is that government wants. So basically that's how you lose out sometimes, because they just go and headhunt whoever they want. The tendering and the procurement is not so open as what would happen if it was a government department. So it's a very difficult space to crack. There's a lot that still needs to be done to just open it up. I'm sorry, these are not answers. I'm just giving a lot of challenges that smaller companies do go through in this space.
Thanks very much for that, Lucky. I think it gives a good indication of how to maneuver in this space. Again, just from my side, thank you to the speakers. It's been an absolutely fantastic webinar, great presentations. It's highlighted a lot of the opportunities in the space that will give people power through knowledge, which is what we're trying to achieve. So thank you to the speakers once again. And then let me hand over very quickly to my chairperson, Mr. Schnabel, who will do some closing remarks, and then close out the session. Thanks, Vito.
Yeah, thank you, Innovation, and thank you to all of you being online and giving your time to help newbies to come into this space. And for all of you that are still online, I can just tell you, you've chosen the right industry. There is going to be a lot that's going to happen in the near future. And our sun is just shining so gratefully. So there is a lot of opportunity. And lucky, I hope you're still online and you're not run out of petrol for your generator, but please next time put some solar panels on your roof and a battery, then this shouldn't happen. And I hope that is the case. You were just referring to that generator being a solar panel that you had to put on, right? So I just want to encourage everybody stay in this industry. There's a lot of opportunities. We listen to all these remarks and questions in terms of where do I find jobs? How do I get in? This series of developing developers is exactly what we're trying to achieve in order to educate, in order to give the opportunities out there. I just wanted to mention also, REAP is not the only market. There is much more in residential, in commercial, industrial. And just to give you a number, so far, South Africa has deployed more than 2 gigawatts of solar PV in the space. So just look at REAP and the amount that was done in PV in that side, and now compare what has done in the meantime in an unregulated private sector. So there is a lot of opportunities in that space, and therefore there is a great future for all of us in this industry. I just wanted to extend my gratitude also to BEPA, the IPP office, and REEF, so the Renewable Energy Entrepreneurs Forum of South Africa, partnering with us on this important initiative. And what can I say? A big thanks to the sponsors, Anatak South Africa and Johnson Crane Hire. You guys are really helpful, and generous support is really appreciated. I'm looking forward to work with you in the next years. Just a little bit on these series to get also some more numbers. There were 23 industry experts sharing the knowledge here. So we've done quite well, and over 1,500 participants. That is really great. Or actually 1,100 participants, 1,500 registered, but 1,100 participants, individuals that have joined these series. That is quite a remarkable amount, and looking forward to next year and more of these kind of things, so that we can really do a just energy transition. That is the most important that we need to do, but each electron counts. So whatever you can do, wherever you can plug in another electron into the grid, please do so. Work hard. We need the lights to be on. Thank you, everybody, and a great festive season wherever you're going to go. Stay safe, stay healthy, even more important, and enjoy the time out over the festive season, but travel safe and stay safe. That's all I want to wish, and see you next year.
Thank you, Vito. Thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Yeah.